News Center, we have the News Nation political contributor Denise Kitchum joining the show right now, as well as the host of a More Perfect Union podcast, and Nicola Corte. Welcome to you both. You're probably somewhere air-conditioned compared to where we are at the north lawn of the White
Not
House.
to rub it in, but yes.
So what about it, Denise, getting ahead of the weekend and where kind of your mind is going into this weekend? Not, everybody's mind is on the heat. I get that, and it's a big story. But for the nation and where we stand and what you're thinking about, what is it?
I always go back to thinking about my parents who are immigrants, and my mother escaped communist China. And so the deep appreciation that was ingrained in me as a child by immigrant parents who came to America to experience the American dream and all the hoops they jumped through to do everything right and according to the letter of the law to ensure that they would not only become Americans, but do it the right way. And I am so proud of them and what they've done and so grateful to them. And that's what I think about the American dream.
You want to get a word in on that or along those lines, Nicola, and then we'll move into some of the news we're watching.
Well, speaking of the American dream, I can't help but think about my family. My father immigrated to the United States from Ghana as a student, where he met my mom, who's Black American, grew up in the Jim Crow South. My mom has told me countless stories of her experiences in the Jim Crow South, her experience integrating into a white school her sophomore year in high school, the experience of witnessing Dr. Martin Luther King assassinated, and the impact that had not just on her, but on a generation of all Americans. And so, with this America 250, it's complicated because of the times that we are living in. It's complicated because so much of that history that we think is in the rearview mirror, it seems to be making a comeback.
No, I hear you on that front, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the good and the bad and all the reflections that people have from their different personal perspectives throughout the next couple of days. Let's talk about the president now for a moment, at least, and then I think I have a contrast to get into a little bit with you guys about another leader and what was said in New York City today. First, President Trump tonight, Mount Rushmore. Denise, what do you expect to hear, tone and substance-wise, from the president?
I expect to hear a lot of bragging and complaining about why his face isn't etched onto that rock face. He's said it so many times. I'm sure he won't let it go. He may have even brought his own engineers to come in and refute what they've said about not being able to put him right up there with all these legends. Look, the president isn't known for being understated about what he thinks he's achieved and what he thinks about America under his leadership. But the reality is, whatever this speech talks about, nothing is greater about America than who we are as a people and what we decide we want to be moving forward. That's going to determine the future and the outcome of what the next 250 years will entail.
Now, ahead of that, Nicola, there was another speech made earlier today in New York City by a completely different type of leader ahead of President Trump's remarks on America 250. Mayor Zora Mamdani of New York City spoke, and we were talking about this a little bit a moment ago. The idea of American exceptionalism was one of the topics that the mayor gave his perspective on. Here's Mayor Mamdani. Let's listen to this and then talk about this compared to the president and everything else.
We are told that America is exceptional because we are richer, stronger, more powerful than everyone else. The truth, my friends, is that America is exceptional because here, nothing is fixed into place. The frontier may be closed, we may have walked on the moon, but the work of fulfilling the values first enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, that work endures, and it belongs to us all.
Your perspective on that, Nicola?
Well, I mean, what an incredible contrast between the president and Mayor Mamdani. When you just asked Denise what she might be expecting tonight, I couldn't help but think about the contrast between a president who's likely going to make the speech about him versus Mayor Mamdani, who made the speech about us, the royal us. Folks who have been cast out, folks who have been historically excluded from the American dream. And I think that's part of where we sit right now as a nation today. We sit at that crossroads. You mentioned at the top of the broadcast that the president has some signing time on his calendar today. Well, is he going to be signing that bipartisan housing affordability bill? That would be such a powerful demonstration of unity, particularly on America's 250th anniversary, but it is unlikely from sources I've talked to that that is on the docket. And so I think, we're going to expect more of Trump's greatest hits, more fear mongering, more election denial, more celebration of what a lot of people believe is a very cruel immigration policy. There are Haitian Americans, there are Haitians and there are Syrians in this country that are absolutely terrified, not because of the American dream, but because of this recent Supreme Court decision that has empowered this administration to turn their lives upside down. And so, it's really the tale of not two Americas, but many different Americas today.
What about from you, Denise? Just the contrast of the openly pro immigration mayor in what he's trying to get across. Hours before, we'll hear from the president, who we know his approach to immigration and how he sees things.
Sure. Well, I watched his speech, and I got to give credit where credit is due. Mayor Mamdani talks a good game about the American dream that his family and ours, our families have lived. And, when I look at, I've worked for enough presidents that I know when I look at presidential speeches, we don't just look at the words, we look at the policies that they're promoting. And Mayor Mamdani's policies are the polar opposite of what the founders were trying to build in America and what his own family and mine benefited from when we immigrated to this country. The founders, they designed a republic where the government's job is to protect your God-given rights and then get out of the way so the people can actually solve their own problems. And Mamdani's democratic socialism flips that on its head. The government becomes the primary provider, planner, and allocator, deciding who gets what and on what terms. And so what I see when I hear him, I think, wow, you are gifted. You are an incredible politician. But the founders put our freedom, government secures your liberty, and you pursue happiness, whereas Mamdani puts enforced equality. Government promises outcomes and then claims the authority to control more and more of your life to deliver them. But that's not modernizing the founders' vision. That's replacing it.
I think there's an interesting kind of take on the whole thing. So I know, Nick, you have a different perspective. I can tell by the expression on your face. So I'll give you the last word on it, and then we do have to take a break.
Interesting to say the least. Look, most Americans across the political spectrum, they want an American government that's going to work for them, not for a privileged few. And by the way, the founders of America wanted the same. That's why they had checks and balances, many of which checks and balances we're not seeing used to keep this administration in check. Look, Mayor Mamdani is pushing forward things that are popular. Universal child care. He's making housing more affordable in one of the priciest cities in the nation. This is somebody that's doing so by bringing people together and not fanning the flames of division, right? And so there are people out there, there are fearmongers out there that want people to hear the term democratic socialism and think that it's something that is undermining the American experiment. Every time you go to the post office, every time you get an unemployment benefit check, every time you get a Social Security check, guess what that is? That's democratic socialism. And most Americans actually don't have a problem with it.
I can tell you the difference.
They may not on some of those things.
The daughter of an
I
immigrant
think some people think it could.
There's a huge difference.
I think a lot of people think some of these democratic socialists want to go a little further than that, too, which is the issue. And it's a big ideological debate right now. And we'll continue having it. We'll continue talking about it. Denise, thank you. Nick, more from both of you as we continue with our special coverage. It's live from the White House today at 13 minutes past the hour. The spirit of